Hey everybody, Dr. G here. I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist as well as a body language expert, and today we're going to be doing a forensic analysis of Jeffrey Epstein's New York City townhome. Before we get started with this, couple of quick things. One, I wanted to make sure you know this is not a formal psychological evaluation of any kind. These are just my opinions. In addition to that, I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, let's go. Recently, the New York Times published an article covering the inside of Jeffrey Epstein's townhome. It included pictures and various details. What we're going to be looking at today is these pictures and these details and show how they supported who he likely blackmailed versus who he probably didn't. All right, let's just jump right in. Now, we're going to start by looking at some of the evidence that supports the fact that there was indeed blackmail material being created. Now, if you look at this otherwise innocuous room, this was on the third story of his townhome. And if you look right up here, as the New York Times pointed out in their article, he has surveillance cameras. Now, you may think, well, he's a billionaire. Of course he's got surveillance cameras. But if you look at all the other pictures in the house, you don't see surveillance cameras anywhere except for the bedrooms. And typically we have surveillance cameras in order to protect ourselves. So if somebody steals something, we can get some footage of them. Typically you're going to have them at an entrance or in rooms where you have things that are particularly valuable. This is a guest room with very little in it outside of a bed. And if you look at the way that the surveillance camera is pointed, it's pointed directly at the bed. While it may be obvious to some that he was doing this, this gives actual support, actual evidence that this was real. He was actually recording people in this bedroom. What we're going to be looking at in a minute is a letter that's going to help you understand the scope of how many people and the types of people that were going in and out of this townhome. For anybody thinking, well, maybe Jeffrey Epstein had that because he wanted to record himself. There's a couple of counterpoints to that. One, this is not his bedroom. And two, much of the vicious and awful acts that he committed were in his massage room, which according to the New York Times, there was no obvious camera in there. Now, it's possible that this house has little cameras hidden all over the place, but they wanted a high-quality, sizable camera in this bedroom, which continues to lend credence to the idea that this is used for blackmail material. That's what the purpose of this camera was. Before we get to more details of the kinds of people that were here, let's look at some of the pictures he had in his house. Now, if you're to look at the types of pictures that he kept a lot of pictures of famous and influential people. Looks like this is maybe Fidel Castro over here. At least that's who it looks like to me. There's Pope John Paul II. These are all fairly normal pictures in terms of his poses. This is the way that you would expect anybody to look or behave in these types of pictures. There's a lot of people that have pictures with the Pope and so forth. But there is a picture that really does stand out. You'll notice pictures with Richard Branson. That might be Bill Gates. I can't quite tell to the left. But the one that obviously stands out is Bill Clinton and Jeffrey Epstein staring at each other. Now, why does this picture stand out? I want you to look at their body language a little bit. Their elbows are touching. They're locking eyes. They're both having very genuine smiles on their face. They seem to be really thrilled and excited about sharing something, maybe a private joke, something like that. Now, the reason that this stands out is that Bill Clinton is someone who had always said that he just was an acquaintance of Jeffrey Epstein's. They weren't friends, they weren't close, but pictures like this that we haven't seen before strongly suggest otherwise. If you were to pose in a picture like that, what would be the nature of the relationship? If you look at all the other pictures he has, these are pretty normal pictures. These are pictures just standing and looking at the camera, just the typical pictures you would see. This one really stands out because of just how unusually close they appear. So there's every indication in this and other evidence that was released during Ghislaine Maxwell's trial, but we'll talk about in a second. There's every evidence that Bill Clinton and Jeffrey Epstein were very close. There's also a picture of him with President Trump, although that's one that we've seen before. And if you're wondering why I'm focused on Bill Clinton so much, it's because we know that he had a relationship with President Trump. They eventually had a falling out, but it's no secret that they were friends. Bill Clinton has always denied being friends with Jeffrey Epstein, but this picture screams that they are very close, that they're sharing an inside joke, that these are two people that are very well connected with each other. Now, one thing I'm curious if anybody recognizes or if anybody knows what it is this logo in the background here. I know they went to Africa twice together, they went to Europe once, and they also went to Thailand together. And it's not clear which trip this is from. You can see that Bill Clinton is wearing a bracelet. He oftentimes did that. I know he wore a lot of bracelets that he got in Africa, so this may be from one of their Africa trips. And according to Bill Clinton, the only times they ever spent any time together was between 2002 and 2003. I know that Bill Clinton's weight fluctuated some, so you could probably figure out what year this was based on how he looks, but I can't quite figure out what year this is from. Regardless, what this demonstrates above all else is that they were not just acquaintances. He didn't just borrow his plane. These are two people that clearly are close friends. The late Virginia Giuffre said that when she was on Epstein's Island, Bill Clinton was flown there by helicopter by Ghislaine Maxwell. Apparently, she had gotten her pilot's license, and she flew Bill Clinton and Jeffrey Epstein back and forth to get to the island. Now, Virginia Giuffre said that she did not witness anything specific that he did at that time, but Bill Clinton denies ever even being on the island. And if he was innocently there, why would he deny ever going there in the first place? Now, Bill Clinton has been recently subpoenaed. Do I see him responding to that subpoena? I do not. Somehow people with his level of power seem to never have to actually respond to these things, so I don't think there'll ever be a single word on the record about this from him, but I think it would be interesting if there was. Now, here's a picture that came out a few years ago. This was not in the apartment. This actually predates the apartment. And this is Talia Davies giving Bill Clinton a massage. Now, she had made allegations that she had been assaulted by Epstein, and she didn't accuse Bill Clinton of any impropriety. But what this does is it shows how close Bill Clinton truly was to Jeffrey Epstein. And if you're questioning the link between Davies and Jeffrey Epstein, here's a picture of them together. This is the exact same person who was just massaging Bill Clinton. Here's another significant picture. Once again, not one from the apartment, but this is Bill Clinton with Ghislaine Maxwell. You can see his hand draped over her shoulder. Another pose that you typically do with someone you're close to. And if you're questioning the Ghislaine Maxwell connection at all, check this out. And if you'll notice, Ghislaine Maxwell also happened to be present at Chelsea Clinton's wedding. But what this shows is a real connection between Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein, and Bill Clinton. And if we're to look at their body language in this picture, see, they're leaning in towards each other right now. These are two people that are very comfortable with each other. Now, Jeffrey Epstein's trying to pose and look cool, I guess. He's got his eyebrows raised, which means he wants everybody to look at him in this picture. But Bill Clinton's leaning forward. These are two people, once again, that are close, that want to be seen together. And I don't think if there is a list that Bill Clinton, if it's a blackmail list, would be on that. You got to think about the fact that they were close. I actually think they were very close friends, similar to how he was close friends with Prince Andrew. I don't think either of them was blackmail material. I think these were powerful people that Jeffrey Epstein liked to keep around, but I don't think that he would have used the material that he had to blackmail them. What I think is far more likely is that if there's a list of unsavory people that have done unsavory things, Bill Clinton would be far more likely to be on that list. Now, I believe Jeffrey Epstein surrounded himself with two types of people. There were his friends, in other words, people that got into debauchery and did all sorts of crazy things with him, including Bill Clinton and Prince Andrew, and there were people that he saw as his victims. Jeffrey Epstein thought of himself as a predator. He preyed on women, and he also preyed on the elite, which is part of, I think, what made him feel powerful. So here's an example of who someone I believe that Jeffrey Epstein would have seen as one of his victims. Right here, here's a letter. This was right next to all of his pictures that said, "I was wrong!" signed by Bill Gates. All right. Now, it's been reported in the past that he tried to blackmail Bill Gates. That's allegedly what happened. And if we're to look at something like this, it does imply that it was maybe a closer relationship than what Bill Gates has reported. Because Bill Gates basically said, yeah, we had a couple of dinners. It was a bad idea. Shouldn't have done it. But, no big deal. This does suggest some degree of likely closeness that they had. Now, not closeness in the way that is close with Bill Clinton. Close in the sense that he probably would have seen Bill Gates as a mark, someone who he could blackmail and get money from. There was actually an article in the New York Times back in 2019 where Jeffrey Epstein had implied that he has dirt on people and had said that the tech nerds are the ones that are the craziest. They're the ones that get into the most debauchery. So if you start putting all of these pieces together, it does suggest that places like this, that his New York City townhome, were exactly the kind of places where he would have collected dirt on people. Now, part of forensic work is interpretation. We have to be able to see what somebody puts out there in the world and interpret it, make sense of it. This obviously is a woman in a bridal gown hanging from a rope, or she's holding on to a rope. This is the center of the atrium. This is meant to be the centerpiece of the place. Everybody is going to see this. So you have a woman in a white gown, which may symbolize innocence or purity or something like that. And she's in a situation that could be distressing. Like she doesn't look comfortable. She doesn't seem to be enjoying herself. He's eroticizing danger in this way. So this goes back to the idea that he sees women as objects. People that are psychopaths see other humans as objects. Apparently, the entryway to his house is lined with prosthetic eyeballs, which is such an unbelievably weird imagery. There's no picture of it, but it's incredibly strange. And when you think about that, when you think about the meaning behind that, it could imply that he sees everything, that he's watching, that he is going to see what goes on there, that he's looking at everyone. Everything that we do, every decision we make means something. These are not exactly subtle pieces of art either, but the psychological undertones of this piece of art are coercion, particularly given that it's the centerpiece of his house. There are a couple of quotes by Ehud Barak, who was a former prime minister of Israel, that were in a letter in Epstein's house. He described Epstein as a collector of people. And he also stated, may you enjoy long and healthy life. May all of us, your friends, enjoy your table for many more years to come. But the idea that he's a collector of people, he is not someone who sees people for their relationships. He's not good at relationships. We're going to get into that. He's not someone who understands relationships well. He doesn't know how to serve people. So the idea that he's a collector of people means that he collects people as objects. He is a psychopath. He collects people in terms of what they can do for him or how he can use them. Ehud Barak also stated, there is no limit to your curiosity, and this is from 2016. You are like a closed book to many of them, but you know everything about everyone. Now, if that doesn't speak to the fact that everybody knew that he was collecting every bit of information he could on everyone, I don't know what does. Now let's look at a letter from Woody Allen. So Woody Allen apparently was one of his neighbors, and there are a few things from this that stand out that I think are worth pointing out that give us more insight into what was going on in this place. Being neighbors, my wife Soon Yi and I have been invited for dinner many times. And for those of you that don't know, Soon Yi was his adopted daughter. Woody Allen is really a piece of work. Always accept, always interesting. Wide variety of interesting people at every dinner just about. Politicians, scientists, teachers, magicians, comedians, intellectuals, journalists, an entomologist, a concert pianist. When he says politicians, keep in mind that means that it's not just one politician. If Bill Clinton was the only politician that he knew or was around, it probably would have said a former president. I would imagine this is probably a collection of other people that are not Bill Clinton when he says politicians, actually. It's scientists, teachers, and so forth. If he's got all these people over, and he's also got the cameras in the bedrooms, it's very likely that at least some of these people, probably not all of them, but some of them, the ones that are more vulnerable to the kinds of things that Jeffrey Epstein is offering, very well could be the people that make up or that compose this list. Because if the idea is that the list is people he has dirt on, he very likely would have dirt on anybody that would indulge in the various things that Jeffrey Epstein would offer. All right, let's get back to the letter. Anyhow, it's always interesting, and the food is sumptuous and abundant. Lots of dishes, plenty of choices, numerous desserts, well served. I say well served, often it's by some professional houseman, and just as often by several young women, I think there's a typo here, reminding one of Castle Dracula, where Lugosi has 3 young female vampires who service the place. Now, this is a very interesting parallel. Now, Woody Allen may be a creep, but he's not an idiot. So when he's giving these comparisons to Count Dracula, it is very much intentional. When you look at the themes from Dracula, domination, contamination, male dominance, female sexuality, someone who is predatorial on young women, that's exactly who Dracula was. So this comparison absolutely taps into the heart of that. So Woody Allen, even just being a neighbor, presumably, knows that this is exactly what he's all about, which means that these other people very likely have also picked up on and observed the exact same thing. Okay, back to the letter. Add to this that Jeffrey lives in a vast house alone. One can picture him sleeping in damp earth. But back to the food. Dependably, a fine dinner, but this was not always the case. In fact, the first time we ever came over, it was a very different story. We were invited with a list of accomplished types, men and women in journalism and TV, even royalty. Now that's interesting. Now that very well could be referring to Prince Andrew. I'm not sure what other royalty he's been around, but suppose there could be somebody else. We were ushered up to the living room where everyone sat around prior to dinner being served and chatted. No drinks were served. You could get one if you asked for one. That should have been the first clue. When the meal was put out downstairs, it was meager. So meager, my wife, the one sitting next to, and this is a little disjointed. This is not the way I'm reading it. He just phrases it strangely. So meager, my wife, the ones sitting next to her, kept mumbling, "Is this it? Is this all we're getting? After I leave, I may have to go to a restaurant." We didn't want to say anything when we came the next time, but my wife did say, in that tactful way she has, "There's going to be more food, isn't there?" Undering her badgering, the situation gradually improved, and subsequent dinners offered buckets of Chinese food ordered from a local restaurant and placed out on a buffet where one could get in line and help oneself. Now, I assume that him talking about food is being literal. I suppose it could mean something else. I'd hate to think what he would be referring to if this, in fact, is metaphorical. I do wonder why this letter is so focused on food, though. I do find that a little bit strange. What this suggests, though, is that Jeffrey Epstein is socially inept. If this is to be taken literally, if he is talking about how bad he was at serving food, that suggests he didn't understand other people's needs. It suggests that he isn't very good socially in this way. And describing somebody as being like Dracula, I suppose, has a charm, but is otherwise someone who forces people to do what he wants. It all seemed odd for a man of substance who entertained many illustrious guests often. Under continued badgering by my wife, arrangements were made for food to be cooked at home and served. She had to explain the order in which things come out. Not the main course and then the appetizer, but the other way around. Now that line I think is so strange. I always try to understand if there's a deeper layer of meaning to things. But saying, I guess it's implying that he's so inept that he wouldn't know that the appetizer comes first before the main course. I do wonder if he's referring to something else or if this is implying something else, because that is such a strange point to make. He may be socially inept, but I can't fathom him being that socially inept. This is somebody who serves people all the time, somebody who's gone out to plenty of restaurants. The idea that he doesn't know what order things would go in. Once again, I don't want to be overly literal, but it's just a very peculiar phrase to put in there, and it's peculiar to be giving him this letter. But let's finish and then we'll talk more about it. In time, she bullied him into putting a few flowers in the middle of the table to make it look mildly warm and inviting. There really seems to be an undertone of anger towards Sun Yi as he talks about this as well. Ugh, I really don't like Woody Allen. This took time and a number of corrections, but his meals have been tweaked into some sense of normal civil dining. The large phone and computer at his right hand does take some of the relaxed home cooking atmosphere out of it, but one can't have everything, not at Castle Dracula. So one could read this as just playful insults between friends, but it seems deeper than that. So if we're to look at this letter as a whole, what it does is it paints Jeffrey Epstein as a weirdo, someone who's socially inept, someone who has no idea how to throw a party. And if he has no idea how to throw a party, that goes back to the idea that why is he doing these parties? If he's socially inept, if he doesn't even know the basic rules of how to throw a dinner party for people, then why is he doing it? It goes back to the idea that he's someone that likes to collect people, that he collects dirt on people, whether it's politicians, scientists, teachers, magicians, people that have power. Now, some of these people he probably saw as props to help stimulate the intellect of everybody there, so I don't think he probably went after every single person, but I think surrounding himself with these types helped him decide who his victims were. Woody Allen falls in the same category as people like Bill Clinton and Prince Andrew. I think that he's someone that Jeffrey Epstein would see as a close friend, not somebody that he would choose to blackmail. So I find it unlikely that Woody Allen would be one of the victims of his blackmailing. Like I said, people are going to fall into one of two categories, and I think from what I'm reading from this letter, Woody Allen probably sees Jeffrey Epstein the same way. He sees him as a predator, someone who invites people over because he's looking for victims, not because he's looking for friends, because he doesn't, even in a basic sense, have a fundamental understanding of how to throw a dinner party. At least if we're taking this literally. We'll go ahead and wrap things up here. But what we learned today, and what we've learned from seeing the inside of his apartment, is that he truly did have a setup in order to blackmail people. He truly did have a way to get dirt on people. So the idea that there's not a list of people that he has dirt on seems so exceptionally unlikely to me that I don't even entertain that possibility at this point. That being said, there are other people that if there's the list of blackmail victims, I don't think that Prince Andrew or Bill Clinton or a number of other people would actually be on that list. So depending on what kind of list we're talking about, I think that it's unlikely that they're going to be on a blackmail list. I think they were too close for that. If you have any thoughts about this, or if there's anything else you want me to analyze, please let me know in the comments below. Last thing before we get finished up is I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, thanks for watching.